Hello everyone, this is Steve Gay, leader of Federal Highway Administration's Asset Management Team. Welcome to Webinar 22 in our Transportation Asset Management Webinar Series, sponsored by Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO. The topic of today's webinar is Data Governance and Implementation for Transportation Asset Management. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. For more information on the webinar series, visit tam-portal.com. That's tam-portal.com. From there, click on TAM Events in the main menu to register for any webinar. You will also find archives of previous webinars and links to video and slides from today's webinar will be posted on the site. You can also reach the site from Federal Highway Administration's Asset Management Home, which is fhwa.dot.gov/asset/, or sometimes I just say just Google FHWA Asset Management. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature. We will answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. I want to welcome everybody to this webinar that Federal Highway Administration, in cooperation with AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. These webinars are a great way to bring people together around a series of important topics and connect with the asset management community. On the agenda today, we will hear 4 perspectives on strategies for successful data management, including specific governance models for transportation asset management data, practices for using TAM data to add to agencies' decision-making, and impacts of good TAM data management on performance results. I believe these data issues are very important for asset management and development of asset management plans, also performance and planning as they all work together. I believe data quality, accuracy, and completeness as appropriate, and timeliness are very important. Also, how your agency uses the data. Map 21 helped put the focus on quality data and strong data governance. FHWA's Office of Asset Management is helping agencies understand how data governance can be used to improve asset management decision-making. And we are helping encourage the use of the tools and resources available today for strengthening data governance capabilities. I encourage you to follow up by visiting us online for more information. This data address that's going to be on the screen on fhwa.dot.gov/asset. I'm going to pass it to Yana Park of Spy Pond Partners to give an overview of today's learning objectives, review today's agenda, and introduce our speakers. Yana, to you.
Thanks, Steve. As Steve mentioned previously, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to data governance and implementation for transportation asset management, understand specific models for data governance and their application to an agency's TAM practice, and begin to apply this knowledge in order to answer how can agencies' data governance models enhance management of infrastructure assets, what benefits can states expect by addressing data governance in coordination with their TAM programs, what are the key lessons learned for agencies seeking to strengthen data governance capabilities as part of their TAM programs. For the agenda today, We started off by hearing from Steve Gay from Federal Highways. I'll introduce our speakers before each presentation, but in brief, we have Greg Slater from the Maryland Department of Transportation, who will provide an introduction. Next, we'll hear from Connecticut DOT with a presentation from Bill Pratt. Bill has pre-recorded his presentation, and we have Karen Reamer from Connecticut DOT available to take questions on Bill's behalf. Next, we'll hear from Omar Smadi of the Institute of Transportation at Iowa State University. And for our final presentation, we'll hear from the City of Seattle with a presentation from Emily Burns. We'll have Q&A at the end, and just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature on the webinar menu at any time during today's presentation, and we'll answer at the end. We'll answer those questions in the order that they've been submitted. And yes, we will make the slides and video available after today's webinar. And those of you who are connected via your desktop computer, you can download the slides right now from the webinar handout control panel. Throughout today's webinar, the audience will be muted by default and only the presenters will be audible. Presenters should be sure to use their phone's mute button to unmute their phones in order to be heard. All right, so that covers the logistics for today's webinar. Our first speaker today is Greg Slater from Maryland DOT. Greg has been with Maryland DOT for over 17 years. That tenure includes 10 years on the engineering design side and with a focus on technology, 7 years as the highway planning director, and the last 9 months as the deputy administrator overseeing planning, design, the highway bridge program, real estate, and environmental initiatives. Under Greg's leadership, Maryland is focused on data-driven, performance-based planning and establishing relationships to develop sustainable solutions for Maryland. On top of being the Deputy Highway Administrator for Maryland, Greg also serves on the AASHTO Standing Committee on Planning's leadership team and chairs the Scope Data Subcommittee. He also serves on the CTPP Oversight Board and is a member of the TRB Data section. Now I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Anna. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I think we're good then. I'm really pleased to introduce this topic today as data governance and data management and really transportation data has been a little bit of a passion of mine for a few years now, and we've really taken the topic across the board on the national level and started to really think about it and where we go with it. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce this topic of data governance. In general, this is really what I would call the textbook definition of the overall management, availability, usability, integrity, and security of the data. It's really about, in its purest form, data governance has to do with how we collect our data, how we work with our data on a daily basis, how we use it in our decision-making processes, how we display our data, how we manage it, and how we work with it in everything that we do. When you talk about asset management and how it relates to asset management, it's critical in your programmatic decisions are made based on the heavy influence of that asset data. When you're looking at a real data-driven asset management program, this data has to be good because we're really, really making some key decisions. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about the asset management side and what AASHTO is trying to do to tackle this issue for the states. I'm going to talk a little bit about where it relates and how it really gets back to some of the federal requirements and some of the key decisions that we're having to make on a daily basis within the states, and then some quick slides on some of the things that Maryland is trying to use it for. Within AASHTO, we started this conversation a few years ago about our core data principles. One of the discussions that we really wanted to have among the states was, what are the real core functions within data, and how we're using it, and what are the things that states can do to guide how they're working their program and how they're using data across the board. Asset management is just one category like that. The first one that we really started with was the value of the data. Data is really an asset in itself, and it should be treated that way and managed that way, and in many ways valued that way, and was really, really an important part of this process. It's available. All the states and really everybody in this industry is dealing with bigger and bigger expectations in terms of not only how you're making your decisions, but the data that's used in your decisions. So the availability of the data is really one of our guiding principles. It's open, accessible, and transparent. Ability to be shared. It's reliable. The quality and extent are fit for a variety of applications. Now, one thing you'll notice is a lot of these get back to how we're defining that in our metadata conversation of making sure that people understand how it was collected and what it was collected for and what they can use it for. Whether it's authorized, it's secure and compliant with regulations. The security of our data, especially today if there are personally identifiable things in that, are really critical for what we do, and maintaining that security across the board is key in not only the success of what we do, but the confidence of our public and our stakeholders in our ability to manage that data. It's clear. There's a common vocabulary data definition. This is really the metadata component. Are we explaining what it's for, how it's used, how we collected it, and how much they can rely on it? It's efficient. It's not duplicated. Really getting into the collect it for one purpose, but you're able to use it for multiple purposes. My thought process on data has always been data sets are really valuable within themselves, but they're even more valuable when you can use them with other data sets. So integration and efficiency, so you're not duplicating, is really a critical part of what we're doing. And it's accountable. The decisions maximize the benefit of the data. We really are using it for the right purpose. We're maximizing the benefit and the value, and we're getting the most out of it. Many transportation agencies are adopting these principles, putting them into action. We built it as a framework. Now, what we've seen across the board is some states have adopted them as is, but also some states have taken them and saying, hey, let's add maybe number 8 or number 9 or number 10, or let me take it down to 5 and really focus on the ones that we want to focus on, but really customizing it for where the individual states want to be, because every one of our states is somewhat unique. So really trying to take it as a good starting point to understand where you want to be, and then focusing on how you can use that to get the most out of your data, value it the way it should be valued, and increase the return on investment for it. This next product is one that we really started to build upon, and it's one of the first research projects and set of tools that really refers to those core data principles, so it's a great example. What this is a great tool and process for an organization, and I hesitate saying state DOT because I think it's much broader than just state DOTs. It's really any transportation data organization can look at this and give you the tools and the process to understand how much you can rely on the data that you have, how good it is, how mature your program is, and everything across the board. It's a process, and I'm going to get into a little bit more on the next slide, but it's a process that talks about the bringing all the stakeholders in the room and having a good open conversation about the data. Getting into things like, do we have the right data to make the right decisions and good decisions and meeting our requirements? That's really where you start with this conversation. What decisions do I need to make with this data? Is it fit? When you look at this, that's the conversation that I don't know that a lot of organizations were having. They were able to look at their data and say, hey, it's good, or it's accurate, or I have a good level of confidence in it, or not a good level of confidence. But that conversation on do we have the right data was one that wasn't happening regularly. Is your current data good enough? What level of accuracy? Its timeliness, its completeness. Are we making the best use of our data collection? While you're out there collecting it, are you thinking about other purposes so that you can collect it once for multiple purposes, but also not get too much of an overkill perspective and collect more data than you really need? Are we being efficient in how we collect and manage it? And are we getting the full value from the data that we have? Are people able to access it? Is it integratable? Can we analyze it? Is it easily understandable? Can we get it to where we need to be? And back to that first decision, can we use it to make the decisions that we need? This really is a graphic that is a great illustration of how the process works. We start with those questions that I talked about in the previous slide, and then work through these phases of implementation where we prepare, we get the right players in the room, establish goals, and set your scope. It's really a good conversation starter in the beginning to talk about those questions, but really getting into assessing exactly where your data is available, what its quality is, what are you doing to manage the data. Is it being, we all know, especially in the transportation and especially in the asset management world, your data changes minute by minute, hour by hour. So are we managing it the right way? Are we getting it to keep it most current so that we can get the most out of it? And are we determining the gaps? Do we have all the data that we need? Sometimes we don't know until we get a question in front of us whether we have the right data. So that's a critical piece to have that open conversation. Prioritize those improvements and get into an action plan. Really, what I like to call in the transportation planning world is set your destination. Where are we headed and what do we want this program to look like? And then start working towards how we get there and get to that mature data program with strategy and governance and architecture and integration, looking at the lifecycle management, your collaboration, your quality management, and then looking at how you can take those into action, maximizing the efficiency of where you're mature, and then growing in the areas where you need to mature. It's important to note that one of the things that we've been really focused on is there's a number of efforts out there in the transportation world, whether it's in performance or whether it's in asset management, that are looking at these maturity level scales. We did do some work to try and make sure that some of the terminology in these maturity level scales matched up so that people aren't looking at multiple different scales and you can get some common language really within the industry for some of these maturity level scales. When you look at the importance of data governance associated with our federal requirements across the board, they're really critical. We all know that when we start talking about data, one of the first places we go is in performance. Performance is one of the things that has really shed a lot of light on data, its accuracy. Not only with the emergence of performance management over the last decade, but also the emergence of it in MAP 21 and the reinforcement of it in the FAST Act and our federal requirements. Now, those of us in the data world know that data is a much broader topic than just performance, but performance has really brought some criticality to it. Is your data accessible for decisions and scenario planning? Really trying to get into the performance world, you really need to have good data to be able to do some of that scenario planning along with making your decisions, to understand, try and get a better picture of your outcome. Accurate data for the effective evaluation of your condition. I know in Maryland, we look at a data-driven approach, but we also look at a collaborative approach where things that are subjective, we bring a number of players in the room and assign ratings that way. And then reliable data to manage your targets. These are critical because you're making critical financial decisions with them. Not only where you're putting resources, but where you're managing projects and where you're managing programs so that you can drive these projects, drive the decisions in whether you want a capital improvement or a maintenance improvement, driving decisions on transitional improvements to increase what you're doing in areas like mobility and safety, and this is transportation systems management. Maximizing the system that we have today and maximizing the opportunities that we have when we're out there. I know one example I always like to use, Maryland has a large interstate system. We have a bridge that carries a tremendous amount of traffic around the DC region that comes out, and we have a Capital Beltway with 250,000 cars a day going across the Capital Beltway. Well, when we're out there doing anything, we need to do as much as we possibly can because maintenance of traffic is the key to mobility. So when you're out there working on a bridge, or whether you're out there doing some safety improvements, you need to take the advantage of having the traffic condition altered where you can reconstruct your full depth pavement and get those things. And data is critical, and the integration of data is critical in being able to maximize those decisions, understanding mobility, but also understanding pavement condition in relation to where the bridge condition is, and the line striping condition, and the signing condition, and the reflectivity, but understanding that across the board. What Maryland is doing to support our data governance efforts is really focusing on some public tools. Well, what we did was we built a process where we have one data set that we've built into a public view, what we call an executive view and an operational view. So if you take the operational view, that's really where you're going to have the most access to your data. Your practitioners, people that are working and managing the data every day, work in that operational view. But that same data gets fed through approval levels, but it gets fed through an executive view where you can look at dashboards and performance, but senior executives don't necessarily want or need to see some of the real details involved in the data. They may ask for it later and we can go through that with them, but really looking at the performance side. And then a public view, how we can show our program and show the data and the performance of our program. We try and build these systems really based on a three-part story. What is the issue we're trying to achieve, whether it's bridge condition, pavement condition, congestion, or safety? What are we doing about it? And that's really where we can start highlighting our investments, and then how those investments and that work made that better. So it's really about taking that collaboratively across the board and then focusing on how we're letting the data guide what we do and the treatments that we give. So what we did on the asset management side was built a GIS-based asset management warehouse. This is a great example of what you see here on the map is simply highway lighting. But as you can see from the pull-down menu, I can look at these interchange ramps and I can pull up the condition of the line striping, if there's any park and ride facilities, pavement markings, rumble strips, signs, barriers, bridge condition, pavement condition. I can look at that across the board. You can't really see it too much in the slide, but you can see that those window controls go down pretty far, and you can add a tremendous amount of assets into what we do and really make a good integrated decision. And it also adds, the added benefit that we found is once you start adding your programmatic work to that, you can find opportunities to break out of not only your funding silos, but your programmatic silos. And the sign folks are talking to the pavement folks, and the bridge folks are talking to the capital improvement folks. And then you can maximize what you're doing all at the same time, come together and do those efforts together. One of the key critical policy decisions that we made in Maryland, because I'm sure everyone looking at this slide can understand that managing accurate data is critical to the success of this. But one of the key policy decisions that we made was two things. One, we made the decision that if you own the asset, you also own and are responsible for the data associated with that asset as part of it. So our pavement management folks are not only responsible for the pavement management and the programs, they're also responsible for managing the data really on a day-to-day or a month-to-month basis on that asset itself. Now, what we're trying to do to make that much easier is also provide them the tools, providing good linkages between not only our asset data warehouse, but also the activities that we send out to our maintenance crews and how we build their day on activities, and feeding that information back to the asset data warehouse through some maintenance management type activities. So we're really trying to build that three-way connection. We've actually deployed several hundred iPads out with some of our maintenance crews who are interacting on digital work orders and connecting to this system to pull the asset inventory. So really trying to get to that integrated approach where the data is live, it's working on a day-to-day basis, and it's really kind of working through the process, and we can really count on what that data is and setting the rules for each one of those pieces of data. So before I turn it back over to Steve and Hannah, I just want to kind of reiterate that we're focused from an AASHTO perspective on really providing the states and other organizations the tools to not only manage their data, but guiding principles and research needed through the data subcommittee, but also through coordination with the management subcommittee and the other committees working through these processes, looking at research and tools. And then in Maryland, we're focused on trying to implement some of those tools, but also implementing a lot of those practices for good data, both nationally and right here in Maryland. So at that point, I'll turn it back over to Hannah and Steve.
Thanks, Greg. Our next presentation today is from Bill Pratt. Bill currently serves as a transportation principal engineer in the Division of Facilities and Transit at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. He's a licensed engineer with over 30 years of experience at Connecticut DOT. And now we will start his video.
Thank you, Bill Pratt from Connecticut DOT. In going through the exercises for asset management, it made us really look at our shop and try to kind of get our act in order a little bit. And so here I'm showing what some of our current authoritative data systems are. And these are systems that help us deliver capital projects. We wanted to harvest some data from these three systems, the obligation plan, CT Core, and Site Manager, and push those to a composite project database that will help us track projects and hence assets within projects. So that's why you see the composite project database in yellow. That's taken those three legacy sources and federating data regarding projects and assets. I also showed the project online system because we're managing documents regarding all this data within ProjectWise Online. And we've kind of come up with that term as major assets for assets that require a unique identifier at design approval. And then they also may have inspection documents within them. And we primarily found out those to be bridges, structural sign supports, span poles in buildings, and also traffic signals. And I think you'll see a little bit later what that means. But it allows us to manage bridge inspection documents in ProjectWise, using ProjectWise as our document management system. But it also allows us to create, develop, and manage bridge documentation during the design process. So when those get created in design, we can store those documents within the project in our document management system, but still relate the bridge IDs to the proper documents. And that's been helping us quite a bit. All these major assets integrate with ProjectWise Online. Okay, so some of the other assets that we have and are managing currently, we have pavement within the Dayton VTIMS solution. We have a linear reference system, fairly new to the state, XOR. And there we manage our road network, road classification, traffic monitoring, some VIP things. And we're beginning to implement traffic signs as a roadway asset within XOR and possible guide rail going forward. We also have a spatial GIS application, open source. We're using Map Server, SQL, and what's called a GeoMOS user interface. And within there, we're locating capital projects, we're locating bridges, and we're locating traffic signals. And then we're also joining authoritative data from the authoritative data sources with those location geometries for basically a GIS. We kind of developed this, what we call our DOT GIS umbrella. There's no perfect solution. There's no one answer for how are we going to store data. And we're finding, with the LRS coming on board, it certainly is built to manage the road network. So we're kind of moving in that direction to let it do that. But it's a little bit easier here for us to locate some of the other things like projects, bridges, and traffic signals, and others within the spatial TED environment that we have developed. But there are cases where you're going to see assets in both systems, and they need to be in both systems for integration purposes and for reporting purposes. And as I mentioned, here are those three legacy systems that, you know, the obligation database has schedules, estimates, and scopes for projects. Our CT core has STIP information and project expenditures, and obviously site manager has construction info. And we're able to federate that data and pull it all together based on project number. But there were some things that we wanted to track that weren't in those legacy systems, so we had to develop some forms right within the composite database to manage things like which bridges are being affected by each project, okay, routes and mile points, sign structures, traffic signals. So prior to this, we really didn't have a good handle on you know, what major assets are being affected by those projects. It's just a little diagram of kind of how this sits within DOT. Here's our firewall, and this project composite database is in a SQL business system data area, you know, that's pretty much containing inventory data. This SQL system then talks with some of our cloud applications. Our bridge management information is in the cloud and using InspecTech, so we're able to snapshot that data nightly, okay? And then we're also able to take some of these things that are housed in this area, like the project composite data, replicated InspecTech bridge data, which I mentioned, and traffic signal data. We're able to push that up to ProjectWise to update storage areas and project properties of those storage areas for our assets and our projects. So this becomes hands-off management now for us in ProjectWise, which was quite a difference from what we used to have to do for manually updating projects. You see Ted sitting out here, and this is where we're doing our location for some of those items that I mentioned. It has tools for project location, asset location. We're able to integrate with the LRS within this arena, and we're able to identify through a project polygon what sections of roads within our road network are being affected. And then we're able to join asset data with project or asset location to give us an enterprise GIS or an authoritative GIS layer. And then we can get some reporting functions from that as well. So in clicking on the next thing, it suddenly got real busy, and this is where we're using our road management service up in the cloud, and we're publishing some mapping. We're publishing some data out to the Amazon cloud, and then we're using an asset-wise spatial publisher, something new from Bentley, to publish a web GIS, and also at the same time, obviously publishing a WFS catalog of spatial features that we can go ahead and share with folks internally and externally for some of our business data. I was asked to go ahead and help us track projects within the DOT, you know, active capital projects that we have going. And initially, we had ProjectWise set up, and we weren't really doing a good job tracking projects. You know, I work for engineering, and really it was all about delivering the capital program and delivering projects. But because we're kind of integrated with engineering, we're able to approach it so that it doesn't impact our engineers and what their job is, and it certainly has helped us understand what we have on the roads and leading to better asset management as well. So this is what we were doing. Again, at this time, this was about in 2010, when we just moved to a digital contract plan solution. So we needed a place for our consultants to deliver plan specs and estimates. And this is out on the cloud. So we had to have each project within, you know, set up in ProjectWise so that delivery could be made. And we had some project properties and project attribution out there. We weren't locating the project, however. The only way we were doing it was through our planning effort for our roadway guys. They were out locating projects after they were completed. The new solution looks like this, where we're locating projects right at the beginning along the LRS and through a spatial polygon representing the work area of that project. And initially, we're locating them, painting with a broad brush. We're locating it with a rough polygon. And again, that polygon, after it's placed, can extract the road network that's running through that project. And that's going to help us with the new FMIS requirements, too, from FHWA regarding submitting road sections of the projects that we're doing on our entire road network. So that rough polygon will get joined with some early on project information coming from the composite project database and kind of help us understand what we got going in the early phases. And as we move forward, we'll be able to refine that rough polygon with CAD information extracted from CAD design. So we'll have a much more refined, higher resolution polygon to show us exactly what those work areas will be. And then obviously the composite project data gets modified as the project moves through the timeline here, and we're able to track really what phase the project's in by some of this automation. Okay, so really where the paradigm is changing is, today it's plans, specs, and estimates, but as everyone knows, we want to do better with assets, but not only that, through everyday counts, we're also looking at delivery of 3D models, and we like to call them 2D and 3D models because there are projects that will only be 2D, safety projects, signing projects, and others that don't need to be 3D. So it will be both. And the paradigm is going to look like this going forward. So here's really what the designer will need and at what phase they'll need it. So as I mentioned, by the time you get to design approval, you pretty much have your design nailed down and you know what you're doing, especially with a structure. SL for D is our complete structure layout for design. But our designer then at this time is beginning final design. So, they're designing all the components of that bridge. And as he's generating those computations, we want him or her to be able to tag those documents with the proper bridge ID. So early on, if it's a new bridge on a new alignment, they have to get with our bridge management group and develop an ID. And what we do is we do a transaction, and that designer is going to know where that bridge is. They're going to know really the spatial polygon shape of that new bridge at this time. So they're going to do a trade. Our bridge guy is going to give the bridge management person a polygon or a KML representing that bridge with proper geospatial coordinates. And that bridge manager will trade off and give the designer a new bridge ID. And then that bridge ID and location will go into our GIS bridge layer. And as that information gets updated within the authoritative system of InspecTech, then that bridge information starts changing within that GIS layer. And then at FDP, at final design, we're going to want roadway asset IDs, location, cost, and other attributions. So we're looking at different things right now during the design process to engage more CAD to GIS, but it's really GIS to CAD back to GIS. Also, obviously, we want the 2D and 3D models at this time to pass those on to our bidders and onto our inspectors for use with GPS inspection techniques. And then at construction completion, we see this information being passed on to our either site manager or something like that, so that our inspectors can be validating those assets in the field for payment, and at the same time record and possibly updated location or any type of field attribution requirements for that asset. And then that verification for payment will trigger a transaction back to our authoritative database for that asset. That's kind of the idea there. So, Connecticut, where we're at right now, obviously our asset management group is working on their TAM, hard work at that, but we've kind of developed a lot of, I guess we'll call it infrastructure regarding asset stewardship, and mainly the roadway assets we'll talk about here. And I have highlighted that the steward assigned from engineering, and what that means is I think we're a little bit different than most states in that we've elected to assign stewardship for each asset within engineering. We assigned assigns to our traffic folks, and they made a working group required to steward that asset. Same thing with traffic signal. It helps us in development of these design tools and help us define those and help us to develop those without impacting the engineering process. And as a matter of fact, we want to be on the opposite end. We want to help the engineering process. We want to give better tools to the designers so that they can query the existing inventory, find out what is actually out there, post back a pending attributed asset to say pending removal during construction, and then have some tools for placing new GIS features within their CAD environment for the new asset that again would travel along into construction and get validated. We also have liaisons from our asset management group assigned to each steward, and then each of the assets has a working group. We have strategic representatives, operations representatives, and data representatives for each of those assets. Okay, so in kind of wrapping up here, this is our punch list of things that we need to figure out and that are in front of us right now. And I think most importantly is develop remaining roadside asset data models. So what that means is, from the list I showed you on the previous slide, we really need to define those data models through those working groups and understand what we need to collect, both at design and at field capture. So in developing those data models, part of that, again, in parallel now, we can develop our prototype for CAD to GIS, and that's primarily for capital projects, which is where the majority of those assets will be coming from. And part of that is manage asset data during design in a CAD environment, integrated new effective assets with construction inspection application, site manager for location validation, any required attribution. So that's what I spoke of. We see this as, as that designer drops in these new assets in a design environment, say it's guide rail or signs or line striping or rumble strips, whatever it may be, we want it field verified or validated during construction. We want to use the inspection process to do that. And as it's inspected, acceptance triggers a transaction with the asset's authoritative database, so no hands-on. So basically it's the data is managed as it's paid for. That asset is pushed back to its authoritative system of record. Since we have the asset data models developed, we can begin looking at prototyping asset field capture tools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to Bill for pre-recording that presentation for us. So just a reminder that we have Karen Reamer from Connecticut DOT on today's webinar to answer questions, so feel free to ask any questions via the web Q&A mechanism. All right, our next presentation is from Omar Smadi. Omar is a professor of civil engineering at Iowa State University. His areas of expertise cover asset management, safety, and data integration. He's a member of TRB's Asset Management Committee and also a member of FHWA's Asset Management Expert Task Group. Now I'll turn it over to Omar.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm assuming you can see my slides.
Yep.
Excellent. Always good to check technology. So what I will be sharing with you this afternoon is some national perspective on data and transportation asset management, and touch a little bit on the data governance and how that can support the asset management process and also the development of the transportation asset management plans. I know MAP 21 is old, and now we have a new act, but out of the 1,676 pages of MAP 21, data was mentioned 361 times, and performance was mentioned 369 times. So there's definitely an emphasis on data, when transportation agencies are trying to make decisions. And there has been an increased interest and emphasis on data from state agencies. That, of course, with the buzzwords and issues related to data. Here are some of the data buzzwords that you all are familiar with. You know, we all need to be doing data-based decision making, performance-based. We need to be more accountable. We need to have more transparency, and we need to do things more efficiently. All of these things require that we have data, and not just data, the right data for the right decision that we're trying to make, or the right data for the question that we're trying to answer. And to be able to show that we are accountable and transparent, we have to develop processes that help us make cost-effective decisions. Those processes rely on data that we have, we collect, we manage, we store as agencies. So why do we care? We are custodians of assets, and to be able to manage assets, that process starts from the planning stage, goes into design and construction, follows into maintenance, operations, and of course eventually what we're trying to provide is a safe operating environment for all our users. And I was happy to hear what Bill was talking about, integrating CAD and design information. So different data needs at different stages of this planning, design, construction, maintenance, and operation side of it. And the fact that we have to have data that is integrated from different sources help us as an agency better manage the assets that we have, better do a better job in the distribution of resources and the allocation of those resources. So this is the most recent I have my hands on, which is a synthesis that was done on asset management practices. We had 43 state DOTs respond, and you can see how we are collecting more data. I mean, it's definitely everybody would have guessed that pavements and bridges, everybody collects this information. It's required. They're the two most important assets that DOTs manage and own. But if you look at signs and guardrail and culverts and lightings and pavement markings and retaining walls, we definitely have a good chunk from state DOTs that collect this data. And you know, how do we manage the collection? How do we decide what to collect? How do we update this information? All of these are issues that agencies have to deal with and make decisions on. And this is, I think, at least 3 years old, if not 4. So I can definitely say there are more agencies that are involved in more asset collection, whether it's inventory, whether it's condition assessment, and there has to be a way to use this data to support the processes that we go through as agencies in terms of managing assets and in terms of being accountable, transparent, and efficient in the decisions that we're trying to make. It's not just asset data. We have HPMS data, we have safety data, we have operations data. All of these things fit into this whole idea of comprehensively managing our assets and making asset management part of the business process of how an agency goes about doing their business on a daily basis. So you put all of the different assets, the different sources of information together, and you get a lot of data. And there's nothing more true than the proverb of garbage in, garbage out. We have to worry about the data that we have, the quality of that data, and other concerns. We could be drowning in data, but we lack information. There is a huge, as I said, there's a huge focus on data, but sometimes we approach it from the fact that we need more data. We really need to look at what decisions we're trying to make, what questions are we trying to answer, assess what data are needed to be able to support those functions and then go about collecting data. It's easier said than done, though, and that's why data governance is a function, a critical function in supporting the data requirements for transportation asset management functions. So what are data issues? So, you know, traveling across the U.S. and even internationally, this is kind of the list that I see people struggle with. There's really no certain order to them, but I was thinking about how data is used in terms of a decision-making process, and then I put these in order. To me, integration is key. We're no longer just managing, we're no longer functioning in silos, even though we develop what we call silos of excellence. There is a lot more interaction between different offices within the department, also internally and externally. So integration is key to making this work really well. The quality of the data is important. I probably should have put quality one, even though we know we can't get 100% accurate data. We probably should not strive for it, but the quality of the data, it drives the decisions that we're trying to make, and also increase the credibility of the output at the end of the day from the models that we are running and utilizing. Access is important because we could have the best data in the world and nobody has access to it. It's lost, it's not used. The cost, we need to start looking at the cost of the data. And cost of the data is not just the collection, it's the folks that work with it, it's the hardware and the storage of it, keeping it up to date and utilizing it. That's all part of the data issues that as agencies we need to deal with. So when we look at data, we can turn that data into information using GIS tools. Here is an example from the Iowa DOT. They're looking at their Interstate 4R plan. This is Interstate 80. We have bridge replacement times. We have pavement condition. We have capacity increases that are needed, whether it's 1 lane and 2 lanes. We have the interchanges and their traffic. So you can integrate a lot of data from multiple sources to turn that into information that you can use to make decisions. So if we're looking at, fixing a bridge, but we know that bridge, that section of road needs additional capacity in terms of adding lanes, or maybe the pavement is not in good condition. Now, in one chart or map, I can see all of that information. And the technology that we have these days allow us to integrate data from multiple sources, so we're making more comprehensive decisions about the assets that we manage. Here's another example that looks at roadway data. We're integrating right-of-way images with aerial maps. I have location of where the curvature begins, so this is important for safety. I also know where my intersections are, and I have a sign inventory that looks at the locations of signs. All of that is available for agencies to collect and also to integrate and make it part of how the data is accessed and how are we utilizing the information that we're collecting. Data collection technology is improving, from one year to another. We can do so many attribute collection in one pass. New technology like LiDAR exists. So all of these cost money though, but there is a use for the data that we collect, and integrating that data and providing easy access to it allows us to utilize the information that we have. Quality. So, there's more focus on we want to collect this data, and then we don't focus on doing quality assurance of that data. So we have to have minimum accuracy requirements. I'm just giving you an example of a national data set. This is the SHARP2 roadway information database. It's just information about roadway characteristics. So there are basically, for the point of curvature, I need to be plus minus 50 feet, point of tangent, the same thing, grade plus minus 1%, and so on. So each one of the attributes that I have a minimum accuracy requirement. I've also established control sites to allow me to check the accuracy of the data, and then I'm doing random checks. as part of MAP 21 requirements, there is a quality assurance plan that agencies have to develop in terms of how are they ensuring the quality of the data that goes into their reporting and into their asset management. So quality assurance is very important, and minimum accuracy requirements are just one aspect of ensuring the quality of the data. We also need consistency in terms of the data. What do I mean when I say about lane width, or when I'm talking about pavement condition? What does it mean, to have a transverse crack, and how do I identify that? So data collection manuals help us improve the consistency and, at the same time, accuracy of the data. So linking all of that to the asset management plan, I've highlighted the different sections of the transportation asset management plan, and I think each one of them really relies on data, but the four that I highlighted in red in terms of the asset inventory and condition, the life cycle cost, the investment strategies, and the risk management heavily rely on data and turning that data into information that impacts what the DOTs and what agencies are doing in terms of the asset management. So how do we end up supporting that? And to me, I think, as I said early on, data governance is critical. So here is a list. It's not probably complete in terms of what data governance efforts should include, but here is a list of things that agencies should be looking at. We have to have a good assessment of what data exists right now. A lot of agencies are surprised when you put 20 of their staff that come from different offices in one room, and there's always a surprise. Oh, we have this piece of information? Oh, are we collecting this? So understanding what we have is very critical. Then we go to the next step of identifying which ones of those data sets that we have are critical, who's using it, how are we updating it, how are we providing access to it, what decisions are we trying to make based on that data. So we identify which ones are critical, identify strategic data programs. Developing an asset management plan put a lot of state agencies in the position of, do we have the tools and the data to support a transportation asset management plan? And so there are, of course, safety performance requirements, again, have their own data requirements, and congestion and so on. So as agencies, we have to identify what are these strategic data programs and start thinking about being more proactive in supporting those. Evaluate the systems, approve new applications. Data governance is not meant to be an extra step in the bureaucratic process. It's meant to standardize how we deal with data and how that data support the business process of the agency. Assess current data standards, coordinate development of new standards. And this would all help the integration and the access of the process. Establishing a quality control and a quality assurance process for all data being collected so we can ensure we're making good decisions based on that data. The data governance structure can vary from one organization to another. Here is kind of a general framework. There should be an executive group that provides support, but also can make the financial decisions. We have to sometimes dedicate staff and resources to be able to establish data governance. Then there should be a governance committee that has the subject matter experts. They're in charge of the overall management of the data at the organization. And then under the governance committee, there would probably be working groups that deal with the technical and asset-specific information. Again, there is not one structure that is right or wrong, but we definitely need the link to the executive group because we have to make financial decisions as part of data governance, and they need to be involved in that aspect of it. There are multiple efforts that help agencies in terms of starting to focus on data. Definitely the transportation asset management plan requirements, the performance measures, the reporting in terms of the highway performance monitoring system. There are good standards there. There are good quality assurance methods. The roadway data improvement program as part of the safety office, MIRE, and the fundamental data elements. provide some guidance to agencies in terms of how do we look at standardizing our process, how do we look about developing quality assurance and quality control procedures. From dealing with different agencies in the U.S. and working with a lot of state DOTs, lessons learned. Location is important. So look, I don't want to talk about location referencing systems here. This is probably not the right venue for it. But as they say in real estate, location, location, location. The same thing when we talk about transportation data. Understanding the location component is very critical, not just to the integration part, but also to the management of that data. Data quality, we've talked about that. There is no one reliable source of data, so the data integration becomes critical, and having the location component figured out would help us in integrating that data. Coordination and communication. There are multiple stakeholders within an agency that deal with data, and we can definitely coordinate our data collection efforts and our data management efforts. So that coordination and communication is very important. I think Utah did a fantastic job 3-4 years ago when they got their planning folks, their asset management folks, their safety folks, and maintenance folks to all agree on what their needs are and had one comprehensive contract to go out and collect a lot of asset data, a lot of pavement condition data for about 5,000 miles in one pass. That would not have been possible without that coordination and communication within the agency. The technology, I think, exists in terms of solving our problems, but we have to look at access, we have to consider storage requirements, and we also have to look at the cost. There is definitely a cost to collecting data. There was a TRB workshop, I think, 2 years ago, where they had 3 heads of DOTs, and they were all talking about how much data collection management cost the agency. And if we're collecting that data and spending these resources, at least we have to utilize the information that we're collecting to make decisions. With that, I'm guessing we'll take questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. If you have any questions for Omar, please type it into the Q&A function of the web tool. Our final presentation today is from Emily Burns of the City of Seattle. Emily is a certified PMP and has worked in public service since 1994 in positions supporting open space land preservation, environmental programs, race and social justice initiatives, sustainable building, public housing, asset management, contracting, business process development, and project construction management. Emily served as a strategic advisor with the Seattle DOT's asset management program from 2008 to 2011, and she rejoined the program in 2014. Many of us saw Emily at the Asset Management Peer Exchange in Minneapolis, where she presented on Seattle's asset management program, touched upon data management and governance. Wanted to hear more, so we have her on the program today. Now I'll turn it over to Emily.
May still be on mute. Hi, Emily. We can see the screen, but there doesn't seem to be any audio.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, thank you. Sorry, this is my first webinar, so I'm getting used to the tools and controls. So I'll go ahead and I'll go through my presentation. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak from the local perspective and government experience. Today I'm going to talk about the Seattle Department of Transportation, or as I'll shortly call it, AASHTO's data governance, our asset onboarding, our asset register, decision making, and tools and reporting. So this slide starts to describe all of the different inputs that go into our asset data. Well, the data is then produced from these tools or put into these tools. Primarily, it requires people to put it into the system. And we're finding that people, communication, coordination, and really set defined business processes are absolutely critical to our knowledge management factors and our successes. I'll start on the left-hand side and run clockwise. The first piece is our asset and performance management program. We're really the strategic body implementing the asset management program and educating our department, our city management as to more fact-based decision-making and risk avoidance for assets. And we're benefited and reinforced by the new federal transportation performance measures. Then we get into our technical group. It's our asset management team along with GIS experts, and then our Hansen or Asset Management Work Management Database Expert Systems team, which prioritize improvements to the system and also look across the department. We know that not all of our data is going to be asset-based or asset-focused, but there have to be those cross-functional analysis opportunities there so that we can report on the same things, so that we can roll up, roll down, whether we're talking about our collisions data, our permitting data, closures, street closures, and sidewalk closures, as well as claims. At the top, you'll see the Asset Management Steering Committee. This committee is the high-level oversight. There are deputy directors and division directors who help us with budgeting, funding, and decision-making, and they are really a big consumer of the reporting that we drive. Then we move on to the Asset Owners Forum. These are typically the engineers who are responsible for planning operations, maintenance, our long-term funding strategies, and then really from that individual asset level or sometimes groups of assets. And new for us is our Asset Management Data Users Group, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But these are the folks that are putting in the inputs of the asset data, which are then output to reporting, performance measures to support data-driven decisions. And then in turn, those fold back into improving our data quality. I really wanted to show graphically the cyclicalness of that cycle that builds in the data quality. We put in the data, again, as we heard, garbage in, garbage out. We have to look then at the performance and measures and reporting, make sure we're getting the right data, driving those decisions, and then making sure that that information is all going right back into good quality data. These are our integrated systems. We have Hansen, again, which I mentioned, which is our Asset Management Work Management Enterprise Database. We use PeopleSoft for financials. Another key critical piece for us is the visualization, the spatial reporting. That's our GIS. Those are GIS tools, and they are integrated with our Hansen system. And then finally, I listed just a couple of our side systems, BridgeWorks and StreetSaver, which then feed information back into our Hansen system. Then they support our high-value assets and reporting to the state, and those are pavement and structures databases. In 2014 and 15, we performed a gap analysis. We'd already identified that asset onboarding was a critical aspect of our program that was not happening well. We are generally decentralized with our data maintenance, and while the maintenance responsibility for those SDOT-owned assets is clear, we're finding that the data maintenance responsibilities are ambiguous. They would be assigned to an individual, and a manager could change, that person could change, and the information was not carrying forward to the next person. And the department would make different kind of organizational changes, and then that notification wouldn't roll back up. So we are moving forward with trying to develop more consistent asset onboarding standards, continuing to improve that metadata, and then developing better business processes for communicating changes to those assets. We want to establish very clear data maintenance responsibilities for the assets that cross those organizational lines, so we can break down some of those silos. Often I know people come to me and say, why isn't this in the system? And I'll explain responsibilities, and there's this expectation that everyone else should put the data into the system. People don't want to enter the data so much. They want to see it, and they want to use it, but they don't want to put it into the system. So we're trying to figure out how to really create that accountability. As we go forward, we find that implementing mobile computing is going to be really valuable for us, so that the folks that are our field staff that are looking at these assets every day, and not just from perspective of visualization from a computer screen, can start to put the information in and get much better data. A big piece for us is how do we centralize asset data maintenance, and for us that means more money, more resources, and we're still trying to figure out what the right mix is. This year we got approval to add one asset data maintainer. For me that was kind of a huge win, and I'm trying to figure out how we can show and build support for that position. And then finally, we're establishing an asset data users group, later I'll refer to it a little bit as AMDUG. At AASHTO, we are often finding clever little names to use the acronyms, and so we want to see people sort of digging and putting that data into the system, so we can improve our governance. So this is the mission statement for our AMDUG group, that we want to improve our transportation asset onboarding and data maintenance practices to then support those asset inventories, our management strategies, our strategic initiatives, budgeting, service level, and finally our performance metrics. The group, the big responsibilities are to get these as-built plan data aspect into our systems. They are we find we have a ton of construction going on in the city of Seattle, from just about every neighborhood, every angle, and so many changes going on. We have to figure out how to get that data into the system. And then the same with our own capital projects. The projects were getting built and information was not getting fed back into the system. So we're providing dedicated staff to ensure those database onboarding activities. Again, following through the cyclical nature or that continuous cycle of improvement, quality control assurance and is just going to be absolute key to reporting out good data and looking at what's missing and why it might be missing and where are those cogs. We want to identify and maintain our backlogged asset data. We've got a number of lists out there that we try to get back to get the data into the system. And I always sort of throw it out there from our teams and our divisions of, we have interns that come in on occasion, and we'd love to help you out. Just give us the plans and let's go to town. And then we continue to examine those data maintenance roles and responsibilities, and again, finding those gaps. We want to support our system enhancements. What data is going to be put in the system? What's going to be valuable? And how does that meet up with our sort of long-term targets? Because every time we go in and configure our systems, it can become very time-intensive and expensive. So we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. We're going to continue to look at asset categorization and our hierarchy as new types of assets come in. We have a huge waterfront that's being redeveloped or on the books for redevelopment, and we know that we've got a number of new what I like to call the shiny, the pretty things that are going to come in that are more kind of placemaking or people engaging. So we want to make sure we categorize those properly. Documenting where our data maintenance is not working or it is working is a big key to this group. And then finally, identifying those new business processes and exchanging lessons learned. So this is our big kind of high-level questions for our asset register status. What do we have? What does it cost? What is it worth? Do we know what the condition is? And if we don't, does it matter? Do we need to know the condition? We are learning more and more about whether or not we can trust the data. What is the quality of that data? And this is a really important question for us. And then finally, do we have accurate metadata? A good example is, and then also, is that metadata accessible? We just recently did a huge curb ramp inventory across the city, and when it was reported earlier, there was a belief that we had many more assets than we actually did have those physical assets, because our data is against the sidewalk, and the curb ramp itself supports an activity or a pedestrian moving off of that sidewalk. So we have what we call shared ramps. So making sure that everyone who is doing reporting knows that metadata, understands how many we actually have, is incredibly helpful, so that we don't have to go back and say, mea culpa. All of these are the answers to these questions help funnel where we focus our resources and our time. This slide is of our asset register. This is our high-level status replacement data confidence and condition on all of our assets. It's our one-stop reference point. Again, I talked a little earlier, but we have very much learned that it's not always cost-effective to collect condition data on all assets. We may do it, we decide not to because of the replacement cycles, like signs are replaced often, and they have a low cost. We also want to determine what has a low business risk exposure, so that, again, we're getting the right data to help us make decisions, but that it's cost-effective. And we're using a cross-section of this information so that quickly we can assess how to prioritize those collection or where we need to focus our resources. We have 47 different assets currently recognized within 11 asset classes. And we also find that this one-pager is very useful as a reference guide for decision making, as well as for our general public. It's something that we publish. And then finally, it informs our future year budgets. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our three inventory collection projects. These were all relatively successfully run projects because they involved our IT group at the outset, and they had considerations for our data structures and attributes, as well as the code values of what was already being collected. Often things would operate in a vacuum. People would say, I need this data. They'd go out, collect a bunch of information, and it didn't take into early account of the structures for our linear referencing system. And so the sponsor then brought it all back. It's an expensive collection, said, okay, now upload it. And there are many times that we were unable to do that. So these are the ones where they were relatively successful. The first one was a bike rack inventory. We had some knowledge of the locations. We utilized Trimble units, and then and interns who went out on bikes and used transit and some vehicles, and we found that it was pretty easy collection, and that we had good data quality. The cons on this one, and more difficult, were to establish linear referencing associations in the Trimble unit. So there was a lot of behind-the-scenes kind of background structuring information that needed to happen to make it upload properly. And then a big key was not having an asset maintainer and asset owner who was invested. We lost a lot of bike rack details because after the inventory load, that person basically just said thanks very much and didn't take care of their portion of the system. The second one is our curb ramp survey that we just recently completed. We're still doing a lot of cleanup on it. This was our most expensive one, and the big reason why it was due to the expense was how many attributes had to be collected. There was a lot of survey-based data that occurred on these 27,000 records. And we used, the consultant used Trimble units. Big pros for us, well, we knew we had to do it because we had ADA self-survey requirements, and then we also found some great opportunities to redefine the attributes that were valuable to us. And then finally, sidewalks are interesting because they touch every single division in our department. And it broke down a lot of those silos and created a dialogue. One of the challenges is that it was partial city coverage, and the tool was not well defined. So I'm going to go ahead and speed through these because I've got just a few more slides I want to show you before the end of the presentation. But we've also got the, oh.
Emily, I just want to say if you could speed it up a little, that would be great.
You got it. Okay. So I'm going to just go through. We have some quick decision-making tools. Please take time on your own and look at them. We've got performance dashboards, our status and condition report. We've got council district reporting. We've now broken up the city into a number of districts to support our new council member structure. And here's the website for more information on different tools that we're developing. This slide shows one of our dashboards. This is for our goal, our target of increasing traveler miles on pavement so that they are in fair, better condition. We had a $1 billion levy, or the largest levy in our history, passed last year, and so now we're implementing it, and we're trying to figure out how to build transparency with our taxpayers. So this is how we show what we're doing with your tax dollars. There's an opportunity to open up the chart, and that's what this slide shows. So you can see a bit more about where we are currently and then where we need to go to on a trajectory. This is from our 2015 Status and Condition Report. This is a 50-year operational cost forecast for SDOT. And we find that these cost forecasts, we can inform our decision makers not only about the big bow waves of what's upcoming, but we can also then model the consequences of what happens when we defer our investments. We ask the question, so what? So finally, for our program long-range plan, in addition to all the tools I discussed before, we have a plan to publish a system-wide asset map for public use. A piece of that is going to be a map of all of our curb ramps and other pedestrian data for accessibility around the city so that the mobility impaired in particular can help plan their routes to get around. We're going to be publishing a streetcar asset management plan using data that we're collecting within the next year, and then finally supporting both the state and bridge and pavement asset management plans, and a system-wide asset management plan that builds off of our 2015 Status and Condition Report. And we're going to continue to implement comparative risk and prioritization models. We are increasing our use of performance reporting and for continuous improvement at AASHTO. And that's the end of my presentation. I thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Emily. So that concludes our presentations for today. Thank you to all of our presenters, and let's turn it over to Q&A. Please continue to add questions. We have 2 so far. The first question was a question on what is federated data. I think this is referring to Bill Pratt's presentation, and I'll just say what is the official definition, which is a federated database is a system in which several databases appear to function as a single entity. Karen, do you want to add anything about federated data as far as Connecticut DOT's definition?
That is correct of what you said, Yana. It's basically taking a bunch of data sources and putting them, like saying, all together into one, and then we're just referring to that as the federated project database.
Thanks, Karen. The next question is, I think, one that any of you can respond to. I think it was asked during Emily's presentation. What is the role of MPOs in asset management? Steve, do you want to take that as a start?
You know, we we certainly know or would hope realizing states are responsible for developing a plan for all the NHS, that where the MPOs have a role with the NHS, they're all coordinating.
Hey, Yana, I'll say something too. This is Omar Asmali. I think the MPOs play a huge role also in other parts of the performance measures in terms of congestion and the environment. And there are some MPOs who have more operational data and environmental data than some of the state DOTs because they have to deal more with these issues. So I think the role is going to be, in some cases, sharing of information. In other cases, probably the MPOs would need data from the DOTs, so that data exchange between the MPOs and the DOTs become more critical. So I think they're going to play an important role, whether it's in the Transportation Asset Management Plan or in terms of the performance measures reporting.
Greg and Emily, do you guys want to share any of your personal experience, Greg, from the state side working with your MPOs, and Emily, as a city that's part of an MPO, what that responsibility is?
I can kind of take a shot at it. Now, our MPOs haven't been super active in this world, but we've been coordinating with them on a lot of really using the data to educate them as to where we're working together on strategic investments. But it's also trying to pull together some of the data from the local governments to try and get it all onto one page as best you can.
Thanks, Greg. Emily?
For us, the MPOs are really, I think, forcing the projects that are going to come down the line. So, of course, the data side of it is we have to get our ducks in order so that we can compare apples to apples.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm going to add something. Yeah, I'm going to add something, Yana, and this is Steve. I can't really talk about rulemaking because we're in the process. But, we saw from MAP 21 that for asset management plans, it's a state responsibility. And you look at the planning and the performance, it goes a little beyond that. And we're often asked, well, how do asset management and performance management really work together? Is everybody talking? I think that's a key for everyone to ask themselves of how does it all come together? And should the MPOs be at the table? Well, certainly with their locals in that communication with the state. And I think the key is all working together of how to manage the assets, looking at performance, and making the best short and long-term decisions for investment strategies.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, looks like we're out of time on the Q&A. The next webinar will be held on October 12th at 2 p.m., kind of going back to our second Wednesdays of every other month, and we'll be on trade-offs and cross-asset resource allocation. You can also see webinar 24 on life cycle planning and 25 on TAM communications that are coming up. I hope you'll all be able to join us for those as well. And so just a final reminder, for more information, please visit tam-portal.com. You can get to it from both the AASHTO website and the Federal Highway website, and you'll see the recording from this webinar there fairly shortly. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to all our participants. We'll get back together in 2 months. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.